Okay, so just wanted to point out something about schedule for Jews in the news for the next couple of weeks, which we will not have class because of winter break. I'll be away for part of that time too. So the next 2 weeks, no Jews in the news. Will be back on January 6th. So which is an auspicious day, isn't it? Monday, January 6th. So, um, we will, what I wanted to talk about tonight is about expectations that we might have of leaders of a country and also cabinet officials, people like that, who are supposed to represent us um, in in the capital and also represent us as Americans, that is, us, around the world. What kind of expectations do we have? Is it right to have expectations? How moral and ethical should government officials be? Certainly, we might take some things for granted, and sometimes other people are chosen. And so that's what I wanted to talk about. There was an article from Brett Stevens in the New York Times a couple weeks ago, which I had saved for this purpose. And part of it is political, and you'll see that I've highlighted that in a color that means to me that we're going to skip that part, but it's more about what he has to say about that. That I think it makes for interesting discussion. But first, I'm going to share my screen, and I want to start with something from the Torah. Um, so this is what I wanted to share first. I hope everybody can see this okay. I can make it a little bit bigger. That's about as big as I can make it, so I could still see you and see the words on the screen. So this is from the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, from the portion called Shoftim, which is Hebrew for judges, and it mainly discusses setting up in the land of Israel as the people are about to cross over the Jordan River. This is part of Moses's lengthy farewell address to the people, preparing them for what society is going to look like in the land of Israel. And when you get there, you're going to set up judges and magistrates for yourselves throughout the country to deal with matters of the community to ensure a just and equitable society. And then it goes on to this section. If, just a second here, if after you have entered the land that your God has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me, you shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by your God. Okay, so the idea is that the people of Israel can have a king. So it's the choice of the people to have a king, and then God determines who the king will be. And so this is the Torah, book of Deuteronomy, and a couple books later in chronology in the Bible is the book of Samuel. And the book of Samuel describes this very process where the people came to Samuel, and who was the last of the judges of Israel, and also a prophet. He is the one to work with God to determine that Saul would be the first king of Israel. Okay, so Torah here describes the process. The book of Samuel describes how that process played out. But the Torah goes on to describe what the characteristics of the king should be. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you, one who is not your kin. Okay, so basic, it has to be an Israelite. You can't You might like the Egyptians and ask for an Egyptian king. No, can't do that. Can't be Syrian, can't be Babylonian. Has to be an Israelite. Moreover, he, that is the king, shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since I think this is supposed to be, since God has warned you, you must not go back that way again. Okay, so one thing, you can't, the king can't acquire lots of horses, which is an element of wealth, I guess, not just horses, but wealth. But we know from archaeological discoveries that there's a town in north central Israel called Megiddo, which has extensive archaeological discoveries, and it goes back to the time of King Solomon, has huge stables there, and archaeologists think that those stables were part of the king's stables themselves, and seems to go against this very law because King Solomon had lots of horses. Did he go back to Egypt to get more? That I don't remember if the Book of Kings describes that specifically, but it's just saying don't have a lot of horses, and certainly don't go back to Egypt to get them, because we're supposed to stay out of Egypt. And the king shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. Okay? Not a lot of horses, not a lot of wealth, not a lot of wives. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching, that is, a copy of the Torah, written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows, or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. The kings of Israel, which the Book of Kings describes, all of them from, Samuel describes Saul and David, and the Book of Kings 1 and 2 describes all the rest. And until the Babylonians come to conquer Israel and send the people into exile. So, of all those kings, maybe there were 2 who followed these dictates. The rest either were at least corrupt and wanting to acquire wealth, acquire a lot of wives, and at worst, they also certainly didn't have the Torah on their lap. They had idols, and they brought idols into the temple in Jerusalem, some of them, and led the people to idolatry. So scholars debate when the book of Deuteronomy was written. That doesn't matter for our purposes this evening. The idea here in the Torah is that the king, the leader of the people of Israel, should be an exemplar of Torah, and should be humble, and as much as a king can be humble. Okay, so understand, of course, that a king, humility and being a king don't usually go together, but the king should have the needs of the people first and foremost on his mind, should not take advantage of the people of Israel in order to acquire wealth. That is, don't tax the people in order to acquire silver and gold. Don't have a lot of wives. That will also lead you astray. That, in other words, you're going to be focused on your household rather than focus on the needs of the people of Israel. And certainly make sure not to go back to Egypt, not just for horses, but that means, don't be idolatrous. And most of all, have the Torah as your guide, and have a Torah written specifically for use by you. and to ensure that the king follows the Torah all the time. Okay, so for Judaism, this isn't just for a king. This would be basically the foundation for how a political leader should function. That a political leader should understand that they are serving at the will of the people and that they should have the people at heart first and foremost. Okay, seems to make sense. And the fact that having a copy of the Torah means that a political leader should be a moral, ethical, and spiritual person. Now, in today's day and age of separation of church and state and synagogue and state, okay, but at least the person should be a moral and ethical person, and you could be guided by the morality and ethics as the Torah teaches. Don't necessarily have to be an observant Jew to be Prime Minister of Israel, but certainly one would expect for the leaders of Israel to be moral and ethical people. And since the Torah is also part of the Christian Bible, one would expect, I would think, that leaders of political leaders in America should also be moral and ethical people. So I bring this up because now I'm not. I know this borders on a political statement about the appointments that President-elect Trump has made for various cabinet positions and other positions within the new government to take office on January 20th and be approved by the Senate. And many of these candidates are controversial, to say the least. And I'm not just saying in terms of their politics and their perspective, but basically about their alleged crimes and some people who President-elect Trump wants to appoint have been accused by women of actions that are illegal. Okay, I'm trying to be as graceful as possible here. So I think I think it's appropriate to raise questions about that. And what does this mean? Why is it that it's okay for President-elect Trump to assume that these people should be approved by the Senate? Why is there no limit or no bar that should be that people should expect that if you're going to be appointed, there should be a basic level of passing a background check so that you don't have any kind of convictions on your record, and you don't have any accusations that are in process or non-disclosure agreements that you've reached with some people. There should be some basic standards, one would think, that for people who are going to serve in the government. Bob.
The line in here says, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess.
Yes.
I think that more applies to the president-elect selling all sorts of chazarai, from perfume to tennis shoes.
Okay. So there's that question too, right? Of the ethics of the business ethics, right? And how the business ethics of not just the president-elect, but also potentially for other people who are appointed, the kind of business that they're in and how that might affect their or impact their ability to serve in an unbiased, neutral, for all America kind of approach, right? So I think that's appropriate to bring up as well. And again, I want to talk more about the idea that these people like this are being appointed, as opposed to focusing on the specific people themselves and make any accusations about the people themselves. I want to keep it to the broader topic of what kind of expectations we should have, which leads me to this article by Bret Stephens that came out in the New York Times last month. Okay, and that I, at the time when the appointments started happening, I was flabbergasted by some of the people who were appointed, one of whom has since, Matt Gaetz for Attorney General, that has been withdrawn. But it was in this process of the idea that a person like Matt Gaetz, with that kind of background and kind of issues regarding his life and actions, how could such a person be appointed to Attorney General of the United States? So he titles this article "Defining Deviancy Down and Down and Down." So it's been a little more than 3 decades since Daniel Patrick Moynihan published his famous essay on defining deviancy down. Every society, the senator scholar from New York argued, could afford to penalize only a certain amount of behavior it deemed deviant. As the stock of such behavior increased, whether in the form of out-of-wedlock births, or mentally ill people living outdoors, or violence in urban streets, society would most easily adapt, not by cracking down, but instead by normalizing what used to be considered unacceptable, immoral, or outrageous. Perspectives would shift, standards would fall, and people would get used to it. Okay, so I just want to focus on this idea for a moment. Okay, so in other words, how does a society react to deviancy or immorality or unethical behavior? And how often does it need to react to it until at a certain point people become immune to that behavior and they think that that behavior is no longer deviant? Okay, so you could say this about, I don't know, pornography, and just look at what kind of dress might be considered immodest 100 years ago that by today's standard would seem very modest, right? So standards change over time, so that's one thing, but more so the actual crime, something that's considered a crime or unethical behavior a generation ago that maybe society would try to put an end to or to try to control, is now, because it has become so rampant, people become not just immune to it, but even it's allowed. So there are plenty of examples that we can come up with, but like this, what he brings up here, which was in Moynihan's article about out-of-wedlock births, mentally ill people living outdoors, violence in urban streets. So we've become used to these things to the point where, the number of homeless people, or as they're referred to now, the unhoused, every communities across America try to deal with the unhoused in different ways, to varying degrees of success and mostly not successful at all. Out of wedlock births, certainly it might not be a stigma so much anymore for people to be born out of wedlock, or for people to run for office who have had children out of wedlock, right? So standards change over time. Is that right or not? So Moynihan's great example was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago, in which four gangsters killed seven gangsters. In 1929, the crime so shocked the nation that it helped spell the end of Prohibition. By the early 1990s, that sort of episode would barely rate a story in the inside pages of a newspaper. Now, let's compare this to school shootings. So I saw a headline today that there was another school shooting in Madison, Wisconsin, at a Christian private school. Apparently, a 17-year-old girl student shot two people, or killed two people, and perhaps killed herself in the process. I didn't read the whole article, just seeing uh, the headline. But uh, um, what is stark to me in the story is that I had to scroll way down on the New York Times website in order to see that news item. Whereas 10 years ago, that would have been breaking news and the first thing that you'd read on the New York Times website. Okay, so there is an example, school shootings, of what Moynihan used when he wrote this article 30 years ago, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago. We become so used to such violence that there's just nothing more we can do about it anymore, or we've thrown up our hands and say, okay, that's just the way it is. Okay? If Moynihan were writing his essay today, he might have added a section about politics. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan won the presidency, it was still considered something of a political liability that he had been divorced 32 years earlier. I remember it coming up in the course of the campaign that people brought it up. In 1987, one of Reagan's nominees for the Supreme Court, Douglas Ginsburg, had to withdraw his name after NPR's Nina Totenberg revealed that years earlier the judge had smoked pot. Okay, again, something that today might not be a big deal. A few years later, two of Bill Clinton's early candidates for Attorney General, Zoe Baird and Kimba Wood, were felled by revelations of hiring illegal immigrants as nannies, and in Baird's case, of not paying Social Security taxes. Okay, so I remember that too. How quaint, like the issues, and that in those days are just quaint. On Monday, a lawyer for two women told several news outlets that former Representative Matt Gaetz used Venmo to pay for sex with multiple women, one of whom says she saw him having sex with a 17-year-old girl at a drug-fueled house party in 2017. Donald Trump is doubling down on Gaetz's nomination as Attorney General, even as the president-elect privately acknowledges that the chances of confirmation are not great. It's important to note that Gaetz was the target of a separate federal inquiry into sex trafficking allegations that fell apart last year because of questions about witnesses. That isn't the only high-profile Justice Department investigation that went nowhere. Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska was politically ruined by a conviction that was overturned because of prosecutorial misconduct. Trump's supposed collusion with Russia turned out to be a liberal pipe dream. Liberals especially should always want to guard the presumption of innocence, not least for unpopular defendants. But if that is or used to be true of liberals, then it also used to be true of conservatives that they at least pretended to care about moral standards. Okay, so that's, okay, the purple here shows he's getting more into the politics of it and giving his political opinion. Here, we can still leave it in general. Why it shouldn't be just liberals who should be thinking about people following the law and representing the law, who should be chosen for leadership positions. And why is it that conservatives now, represented by President-elect Trump, don't care about people's background and in fact might be flaunting the idea that people are accused of wrongdoing and could still be appointed for these positions. Man gets used to everything. The beast. Dostoevsky has Raskolnikov observe in Crime and Punishment. There's a hopeful coda to Moynihan's warning. In the years after he published his essay, Americans collectively decided that there were forms of deviancy, particularly violent crime, that they were not in fact prepared to accept as an unalterable fact of life. A powerful crime bill was passed in Congress. The police adopted innovative methods to deter violence. Urban leaders enforced rules against low-level lawbreakers. Bad guys were locked away, and cities became civilized and livable again. Part of that achievement has been undone in recent years, but it's a reminder that it's also possible to define deviancy up. In politics, we can't start soon enough. Okay, so I wanted to share that just to bring this up for discussion, just to say that I've been, like I said earlier, I've been surprised, flabbergasted by these choices and am concerned about how different agencies and cabinet posts are going to be run under the leadership of these people that President-elect Trump has chosen. And that maybe they'll, well, I don't want to make any assumptions. I'm just saying, based on the people who have been chosen and their background and their history that we know of from work and their public statements that they've made over the years, we're in as Americans for an interesting time for these next 4 years, and I'm concerned about that because no matter whether a president is Republican or Democrat, one would have assumed that, and I think it would have been safe to assume that people chosen by Republican or Democratic presidential candidates or president-elects would have at least passed an FBI background check and would have passed the eye test, meaning that people don't have anything on their record that could cast aspersions about their character. And so clearly, several people that have been chosen by President-elect Trump don't pass the eye test. And this article that Stevens wrote just brought that message home. And he's hopeful that perhaps despite these choices, maybe we can become more moral and ethical, but I don't see any signs of that happening at all. And in fact, I think this just makes our country that much more polarized, and will and gives the message that it's okay to flaunt morality and ethics and even law in order to for political gain. So any thoughts or comments about that? Any questions?
Well, I think most of us agree with you, Jonah, that some of the choices are way out there and probably won't, and hopefully won't stand up to scrutiny.
I'm not so sure. The Matt Gaetz one
That's
certainly
gone.
that was withdrawn, but the others seem to be having enough backing, like Hesketh for defense, and others, RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services.
Which is ridiculous.
So again, I don't, I, you can make that comment, Julian. I'm not going to make that comment. I think it's clear what I'm saying, that
It's
yes,
ridiculous to us, but 80 million people voted for it, and there was no shock in who he appointed. Who do
okay,
you think he was going to appoint?
okay.
Right?
So
And
David,
the financials and the treasury, he did appoint normal people,
ah,
right? It's more a reflection on the entire country to me rather than Trump.
okay. So let's, before I call on anybody else, David raises a good point, right? So we get what we vote for, and even though I'm not assuming how people voted here, I'll just say I didn't vote for him, but still I have to accept the results of the election. And yeah, so I shouldn't be surprised that this is happening. But so I guess I'm not surprised, but I'm still, it's just another element of this election and the whole election cycle leading up to this, and the discourse, the social media posts, and all of that that just keeps on piling on, that goes against what my vision of what American society should be, and that it should be moral, ethical, and legal, and that the President of the United States should be first and foremost in promoting that kind of discourse. Clearly, he doesn't, and the nominations also are meant to make sure that we stay polarized, or at least following President-elect Trump's politics. So the idea that there can be change is gets that much harder to see. In other words, and this will be a topic for another session, the idea of how exhausted people who are fighting for social justice issues, and fighting for appropriate discourse, dialogue between people, respectful conversations, how much we get more and more exhausted when we see how further away that ideal gets. So it's one thing to work for positive change, and work for a just and equitable society when you see that some changes are being made in that direction. It's harder to work for it when the opposite happens, when people are elected and people are nominated for office who want the opposite of that to happen, right? So there have been people who have been writing about that sense of exhaustion, and how, where can people like us who are looking for social change, for just like some positivity in American society, what do you do to try to keep saying that the glass is half full, and have an optimistic kind of outlook? That it's just very, very, very difficult to do that. Bob, what did you?
Just that
Yeah.
I was a security officer for my company, so I was in charge of the security clearances, etc.
Yeah.
The fact that they wanted to give people access to information with no background checks
Mm,
is just appalling.
right.
And furthermore, if what's his face gets in there and becomes the FBI director, then the background checks won't mean bupkis, because he'll just wave everybody through. So
Right.
as a security person, that makes me a little crazy.
So yeah, so in that specific realm, right? So in the FBI world, yes, that raises questions. And so that's right. And so I would imagine that in the healthcare world, people might be having their objections also about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. heading up the Department of Health and Human Services, and that questioning about vaccines and, for example, and whether vaccines are effective or not, like flies in the face of accepted health science today that we know to be a fact. So yes, so those are just two, and I would imagine that lawyers for the department in the Department of Justice might be concerned also, and government employees in general might be concerned because of who's heading up this Department of Government Efficiency, and how they perhaps are going to be firing people left and right in the government. So accepted norms of how people are hired, how people get promoted, and accepted norms for the particular agencies as well are just seemingly being thrown out the window. So that also adds fuel to this fire of, whoa, not only are we exhausted, people like myself are exhausted about the threats on social justice and decency in America, but also the threats to how the country should be functioning, and accepted norms like science should be accepted, law should be accepted, and not be questioned. Stacy.
And to piggyback off of all of that, the Department of Education being run by someone from the wrestling world and trying to dismantle the Department of Education. Like, I think almost all of you on here know that I am an elementary school teacher. And if you didn't, I teach fourth grade. And it just boggles my brain. Like, I've been trying to stay off social media and the news since like 2 days prior to the election. And so
Mhm.
my mom and my sisters are telling me all these things that they're like, "Did you hear about this?" I'm like, you're kidding me, right? This is a joke, right? Like, he didn't really appoint her to be in charge of education. So it just boggles my brain. And at this point, I'm like, I don't want to hear anything. I just want to do my job. I just want to do
So
my job.
so your point, Stacy, that last point is right. So, that's sometimes what we can try to do is just stay in our bubble and hope that we can function within our bubble, and that we can be safe, and we can provide for our family, and we can live a meaningful life within our bubble without worrying about the bubble bursting. And I'm not on social, well, I am on Facebook, but I don't read political posts, and I certainly don't read comments that people write about political posts. I only read New York Times and the Times of Israel, and that's all I do. I know, and I don't. The only news I watch on TV is at 9:30. The Channel 8 replays the 6:30 ABC News. So I just watch. That's all I watch. I know there are people who are addicted to different news channels and the panel discussions on those news channels. I would find myself being very aggravated, and if I if I weren't bald, I would become bald because of pulling my hair out and being frustrated by doing all that. So there's something to be said actually for people's mental health not to be on social media. And in fact, a lot has been written by mental health professionals about the detrimental impact that social media has had on the mental health of the youth in our country, and the rise in suicide, the rise in anxiety, mental health issues is astronomical with the advent of TikTok and other social media outlets that kids are addicted to. And the same is for adults as well. So I can't preach enough to stay off of social media to for our own mental health. But so that just adds to the anxiety and the aggravation and the tension that we feel, that some of us feel about what's going to happen as of January 20th at noon. Barbara.
Well, going back to something else, the fact that they're accepting all this immorality, but that's what the people are in this country are. They have been lowering their standards, and you've pushed so hard to get everybody to vote, and you're getting the bottom of the barrel out of people. They see themselves in this president-elect. And unfortunately, that has happened within the country.
So to that point, what comes to mind, Barbara, about what you're saying is that a segment of America that has been so enamored with the president-elect is the Christian evangelical community. And so that seems contradictory.
What they say and what they do.
No, I'm just saying, I just want to point out again that one would imagine that someone who's a Christian evangelical would be someone who lives a life of the Bible as taught in church and would want to be as good a person as possible and to follow the teachings of Jesus. And would imagine that such a person would want to vote for someone who espouses that kind of outlook. And to talk about mind-boggling, Stacy, the mind-boggling is how Christian evangelicals see Trump as a hero, and that they see him as the person who's going to save America and bring people back to the church. And you just don't understand how people could be thinking in that way. So the people who should be quoting Deuteronomy 17, like I started our class with, should be the Christian evangelicals and should be voting for such a person who has the Bible in their hand. And so,
the Bible that they have says that that abortion is the abortion issue.
Okay, so I don't want to go into all those issues, Barbara. I understand.
No, but they what they're picking and choosing, but
Right.
and besides what they preach, it's what they want to do in their heart, and what they want to see is here is a guy who is everything that they want to be, and therefore they vote for that reason.
So I'm just, what I'm disagreeing with is a different impression. So in other words, a Christian evangelical, Jimmy Carter, when he was running for president in 1976, made waves in an interview he gave to Playboy magazine, in which he said that he lusted after women in his heart. Now, he was still elected in 1976, but saying something like that out loud for someone who is a very Christian man, right? Teaches Sunday school until just a year or so ago. He's 100 years old, should live and be well, and taught Sunday school. So if you're thinking of someone who should be voted into office by Christian evangelicals, it would be Jimmy Carter, that kind of person. But he said he lusted after women in his heart. But that's all he did. He thought about it, he didn't act on it. And the president-elect, I'm not going to accuse him, but there were audio tapes, right, from what was that, Hollywood Access, whatever that was, about talking about what he'd like to do to women. So, and what he did to women, not like what he would like to do, but what he did to women. So, and so that's the element that just doesn't make sense to me. I understand, Barbara, what you're talking about, but what I'm saying is in the bigger picture, Christian evangelicals should be consistent in one's biblical religious outlook, and that you vote for someone who embodies what you imagine that kind of person to be. Any other thoughts or comments? So I just wanted to bring this up, and I wanted to just have a little discussion about this, and that we could apply the same standards to Israeli political figures as well. And there are people in Israel who, the way the political system works in Israel is that there's a whole range of political parties to vote for, and there are some people in Israel who vote specifically for religious political parties because of the ideas that Torah is more important than democracy or other issues of secular government. So there are choices that people can make in Israel for following through on what people's ideal of a political leader should be. And there are people who are protesting in the streets in Israel against the government of Israel right now and the choices that it is making, and not just in the conduct of the war and the lack of initiative in bringing the hostages home, but also about judicial overhaul and other issues like that. So these issues are global, and I think part of the process of change is what's becoming harder and harder now is to convince people that of the idea, to convince people that the image of the political leader should be different than the image of the political leaders who are being elected right now around the world. And we're in a cycle now that potentially is a dangerous cycle of people flaunting the law, people flaunting moral and ethical standards, and God forbid it shouldn't lead to tragedy as it did 80 years ago in Europe in World War II. I'm not like a doom, I'm not predicting something like that, but I'm just saying that from what I've read from people in the New York Times and elsewhere, that we're in a cycle again, and it's tragic that we don't learn from history, and we just pray that we can be advocates for change, and that perhaps in 2 years, in the next election cycle, 4 years, the next presidential election cycle, maybe there could be people who will be charismatic enough, who people can vote for, who speak differently and project different ideas. All right, have a good evening, everybody. And like I said, the next Jews in the News will be 3 weeks from today. Hope everybody has a happy Hanukkah next week, and enjoy any winter break if you're taking vacation. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.